Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. Today we are going to get into one of the most storied herbs in history. This is going to be a big one. It's probably going to be a long podcast. The herb is sage, so it's both medicinal and culinary, so I'll be able to kind of, incorporate recipes into the herbal info. Sage is, literally the most famous herb in herbal history. It is the herb of which Hippocrates say, why should a man die if he has sage in his garden? It was considered to be a cure-all. It was considered to be an absolute panacea. Sage likely became important to ancient man because the water was not good to drink. And sage, wormwood, mint, those are the three main herbs of the ancient world, are herbs that have antimicrobial properties that can make the water safer to drink. So very likely, before our ancestors ever came up with any known herbal remedies, they figured out if they steeped herbs like this in water, the water was less likely to make them sick. So sage tea would have been one of our ancestors' very first beverages. Right along with wine and mead and all that, sage tea would have been up there. And presumably, it's not a stretch of the imagination that they would have noticed that, and they would have figured out that if they used sage and herbs in the mint family and such, they could preserve meat from spoilage. And that's where we get sausage from. That's where we get salami and all our wonderful cured meats. That's where we get really all of our culinary herbs from. It was medicinal herbs that were being used either to preserve food or to make water okay to drink or to settle an upset stomach. When you eat bad food, you get food poisoning. And so these herbs not only help with digestion, but they could help with diarrhea, which is something that sage does very well, and indigestion and gas on the stomach, etc. And so, really, when I think of sage culinarily, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is sausage, right? So I'll just go ahead and knock out a couple of the recipes I enjoy right up front. I really think of sage as a very British culinary herb. Really good English cooking often includes sage. And so I got some recipes at the end that I got from Miss Grieve, Modern Herbal. She actually includes a few recipes in that book as well. I think you're going to love these. Sage is underused in the modern kitchen. It's underused in herbal medicine even. Sage is easy to grow, and it is so effective for so many things. But in foods, we usually think of it in, dressing or stuffing you might have at Thanksgiving, right? Or we think of it as a breakfast sausage, good old Jimmy Dean or whatever breakfast patty sausage you like. And, breakfast sausage is super easy to make. I like to make my own. Now, I've got a meat grinder. I've got the old-fashioned hand-cranked meat grinder. I like it. It doesn't get hot. I can actually, put it in the freezer before I use it, and I mean everything stays nice and cold so the fat doesn't melt. I love my hand cranked cast iron meat grinder. I have a very old one that is, I don't use it anymore, it's more of an antique. And I have a new one that is almost identical. It's an Italian American company. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. It cost me like 20 bucks. It was, one of the better investments I've ever made. Anyway, and it just clamps onto a counter. It's got a screw on the bottom. And I like to use pork butt. Same pork butt I use for barbecue. Cut it into cubes, into chunks, run it through that meat grinder, and I've got sausage meat. Now, you might want to add a little extra fat to it. So I do save back pork fat and just put it in the freezer. So I always have some on hand to use. Whenever I'm doing something where I don't want a lot of fat, like maybe I've got, I'm just going to fry some pork chops or oven roast some pork chops. A little fat's fine, but when it's got that inch thick layer around the edge, it's much more valuable to me just to cut that off and throw it in the freezer and use it to make sausage with. I'll do the same with beef. I actually really do like to combine beef and pork, and I always save my beef fat. Never waste my beef fat. It either gets rendered down to use as fat in cooking, or I save it and I grind it up as sausage. Anyway, pork butt is the essential cut, and you just grind it up. And as you do, really what you want to do beforehand is mixing all your herbs with the pork. Pop it in the fridge for a while. I let it go overnight, and the next day I grind it up. Just let those herbs really get in there. And your salt, of course, salt is what you use to cure your meat. Now, this is a cooked sausage, so you don't have to use curing salt, pink salt. Nothing with the sodium nitrite, sodium nitrate, saltpeter, whatever in there. You can use just regular old kosher salt or table salt. I would not use an iodized salt. The flavor, it's going to have that kind of metallic iodine flavor. So I just use any kind of good plain salt. And, I've got the ratios of meat to salt in my cookbook. It's not that important because, like I said, this is a cooked breakfast sausage. You don't have to make it overly salty. You don't have to over-herb it by any means. So if you want to just make a country breakfast sausage the way my grandma used to make it, and she made a lot of it, and she'd freeze some, she'd roll it up in butcher paper and then a layer of tinfoil around it and freeze it. Sometimes she would can it. She would put the sausage in a jar and hot bath can it. It'd be fully cooked, and she'd cover it with pork fat, and it would just seal in there like potted meat. And that would stay in the refrigerator or even the cellar, and it lasted for years. Now, that's not considered safe by today's food safety standards. They'll warn you about botulism in that regard. So I'm not going to tell you to do that. I'm just going to tell you that's the way my family preserved meat for hundreds of years. That's the old-fashioned way of doing it. That's the way you do a duck confit, duck meat preserved under fat. That's the way you do potted meat. That's the way you do pâtés. I mean, it's really... Just be safe and be clean and look into it. Again, I've got advice on that in my book. But there are some really good, what they call charcuterie, that's French for sausage making, books out there that tell you exactly how to do that. But right now, we're just talking a country breakfast sausage like everybody loves, right? So into that, with that chopped up pork and chopped up fat, just cubed. It's not ground yet, right? We're going to mix in some herbs. I like sage. Sage is the predominant flavor I want in a country breakfast sausage. We're going to use a little sugar. We're going to use a little salt. Probably twice as much salt to sugar. I don't like a lot of sugar. Really I don't. But that's up to your taste. I like to add a little parsley because I think parsley makes everything better. I like to add some garlic. Again, that's up to you. If you don't like garlic in your country breakfast sausage, don't add it. So on this, you could use fresh garlic or you could use garlic powder. Garlic powder is a little easier to work with when it comes to sausage making. And black pepper, plenty of it, and crushed red pepper, plenty of it. That's my country breakfast sausage. I let that marinate overnight. Then I run it through the grinder, roll it into a log, wrap it up in butcher paper, and pop it in the fridge, let it firm up. And when I'm ready, I just slice it off and I make patties. And excellent quality breakfast sausage that is actually pretty good for you and tastes fantastic at a fraction of the price of what you're going to pay for a national or even a store brand. Really good. Another sausage recipe that always comes to mind when I think of sage is a very English style sausage. This one I got from an English chef years ago. I cannot remember his name. I think his last name is Ray, something Ray, maybe Scott Ray. Anyway, it's kind of my version of his traditional English sage and onion sausage. It's really good. Again, you're going to get your pork butt all cubed and ready to go, and you're going to mix into there plenty of sage. I mean, it's a sage sausage. A little marjoram is nice, okay? And again, I like parsley, totally optional. You know, you could do the old parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme if you want to. That's going to taste fantastic as well, and I've done that before. Any combination of those herbs, just let sage be the predominant. Chop in there some onion, and I'm in this one I'm using, yes, raw onion, but you could use onion powder if you want to, and green apple. Take green apple, cut the core out of it, chop it into small cubes, and put it in there. So this does have, you know, you can use a raw onion because you're using raw green apple in here, okay? Salt and pepper to taste. I like to add a little white wine. I think it brings out the flavor a little bit, not too much. Mix it up really well, pop it in the fridge overnight, grind it up the next morning, same way in patties, but you got to remember you got raw vegetables in this, so it's not going to keep as long as the breakfast sausage would. I only make a small amount at a time if I'm going to use it in the next, well, within 3-4 days, certainly. And it's so delicious. Oh, yeah, and you do want to put a little sugar in that too because it enhances the flavor of the apple. You could put a little cinnamon, a little clove in there. Again, those are, you know, spices that are going to be nice with that apple. I've done it all kinds of different ways. I have not found a bad recipe when it comes to making this English sausage. And it fries up nicely in patties after, I mean, you know, everything's ground together. You don't get chunks of onion and apple. Everything comes together really nicely. It makes such nice patties, and they are so good with some soft scrambled eggs with butter and a piece of toast. And I'm telling you, that is some English cooking I can get behind. And in terms of you know, stuffing or dressing, you know, my grandmother taught me to make her dressing recipe years ago, and it was just so simple. She would take basically stale bread. She would take any leftover biscuits that would go in there. She would take baked cornbread. She always fried her cornbread, but for the dressing, she would bake it. Really important to get that crumbly texture. Fried cornbread is just too soft. I mean, too firm. It's just too firm. It's been fried. It's crispy. That's not what you want. So you just take all that, crumble it up, toss in some chopped onions, celery, really anything else you like. Sage is the main herb in the dressing or the stuffing. The only difference between dressing and stuffing is stuffing goes in the bird and dressing goes around the side. Okay. So anyway, put all that in there. Usually she would add chicken broth or turkey broth. You know, it's Thanksgiving. She was roasting the turkey. She boiled the neck and everything. So you had turkey broth and some meat. You know, she liked to put some chunks of or shreds of the poultry meat in there as well. You may want to do oysters and sausage. That's delicious. So that's totally up to you. But some broth, definitely to start it coming together. 2-3 eggs broken up, mixed in. And yeah, I think that's got it covered. Celery and onion, the herbs, broth, eggs, bread. Yeah, it just comes together into sort of a, oh, I guess you'd call it a pudding-like consistency. Salt and pepper to taste, of course. Put it in a baking dish and bake in the oven until it's done. Nice and brown on top, kind of crispy around the edges, still soft on the inside. Absolutely delicious. You tailor it to your taste. I mean, if there's something you want in there, if there's something you don't want in there, it takes a little practice to get the time and temp down and, you know, get the balance of salt and everything just right. But essentially, you're just taking scraps, right? This is just like leftovers or waste bits that would have been thrown away. Mixing them together, stale bread and bits of vegetables and a little broth and a couple eggs, right? Mix it up with your hands. Get in there. And then just bake it up. And it's, you know, it's the quintessential holiday side dish. At least it is in my mind. I mean, it definitely predates green bean casserole, for instance, or, you know, even cranberry sauce. This dressing goes back to medieval times. The first recipes for that traditional, what we would call dressing or stuffing, literally go back to ancient Europe, in England. I'm thinking this is showing up somewhere around, oh, I don't even know, 1000, maybe even before that. And yeah, I'm thinking it could have even been before that. I'd have to go back to my old cookbooks to really source it, but I mean, that's just a family recipe that's always been in our family. I don't think it was ever a generation of my family that did not make dressing to go with a bird. And we did a lot of we live in the swampy areas of the Carolinas, plenty of ducks and geese, and they raised poultry as well. So this would have been pretty common on my grandmother's table. But let's now get into the medicinal aspects of sage. Now, it's important, first of all, to realize that the Latin name of sage, and really all the 500 members of the sage family, we're actually talking garden sage here. So this is, but anyway, this is Salvia officinalis. That means it was the official herb used in the officina in monastic medicine, which was like the apothecary. It's salve officinalis. Um, in Latin, salve means to save. It's also a greeting. It can be like, hail or hello, be well, to your health. It can mean all these things, right? So, I mean, if you're Catholic, you obviously recognize Salve Regina. That's a common prayer we say, which in the Catholic Church. It's a Marian hymn, as you would say. That just tells you how important this herb was. It was literally synonymous with health and healing. First writings of the medicinal use of sage are likely lost to time. I mean, seriously. It does go back way before recorded history. We find it recommended in some of the earliest documents that have ever survived. Its properties were known for at least centuries prior, but the Ebers Papyrus, which dates to about 1550 BC, recommends sage and describes its use in ancient Egypt, showing that the astringent and antiseptic properties of sage were already well known. The Divine Husbandman's Classic of Shin Nung, which is one of the oldest documents in traditional Chinese medicine, dates to about 2800 BC, and it describes the use of sage in ancient Chinese medicine to invigorate the blood and for eye issues. Dioscorides, and like I said, there are like 500 varieties of sage. Many of them have very interesting properties. Some of them are slightly hallucinogenic. I mean, sage is a wide family of plants. Most of them are fairly safe to eat. Not some of them you might want to stay away from. But we are talking about Salvia officinalis. That's the one that has been used in medicine the most, and the one that we use culinarily. By the way, we think of American sage, white sage, sagebrush, and all that. That's actually not a sage. That's actually an artemisia. That's in the wormwood family. Although the two families are somewhat related, it is a different plant. So we're actually talking here the sage you would like go to the grocery store, go down the spice aisle, and buy, a little bottle of dried sage, even though you can get a lot better if you get it from your garden or from a friend who grows herbs, or really even from an herbal medicine supply store than you're going to get on the spice aisle at the grocery store. Actually, let me qualify that a little bit. The ethnic food sections, like especially the Mexican aisle, they have these little packets of fresh herbs, of dried herbs, and they sell very quickly. I've actually found much better quality at much cheaper prices in culinary herbs in like the Badia brand than I have over like 2 aisles over on the baking aisle, and like really like McCormick's and Spice Island that are pretty expensive, and their herbs are a little stale, honestly. So just to qualify that, still you're going to get the best from your garden. And sage has been there are wild sages certainly in America, but so many immigrants brought in sage and planted in their gardens that sage will be found growing, I guess you would say feral. I mean, it's gotten out of the garden, it's growing wild, really anywhere in the United States. Maybe not the desert, but anywhere else, anywhere, certainly the English and the Irish and such, the French love their sage. Everybody loves sage. It's just one of those indispensable herbs. So, Dioscorides referred to sage as, ooh, this is going to be a tough one. Yeah, Helolithfacum. Helolithfacum, maybe. I don't know. Let's skip that. And he said, he describes it, and of course, you know what sage looks like. It's got a little silvery, kind of greenish tint to it. The leaves are soft in texture. Um, yeah, it's a pretty little plant. I mean, and it can actually grow a little bit bigger than a pretty little plant, but it's an attractive plant, and the smell is what you notice. It has the smell of sage, which makes my mouth water. To me, sage is just the scent of it is a great appetite stimulant. Maybe because I just associate it with some of my favorite meals, which are, Thanksgiving and Christmas. He said a decoction of the leaves and branches taken as a drink is able to induce movement of urine and menstrual flow. It is an abortifacient. All these herbs are, by the way, mints, artemisias, sages, taken in large amounts will cause a miscarriage that will also likely threaten the life of the mother. So when he says abortificant, don't think he's recommending it for that purpose. In fact, that's a strong warning, is what that is. It dyes the hair black. It is a wound herb and a blood stauncher. Sage can help stop bleeding. It has those astringent properties. Specifically, that works best if you just put dry sage on the wound. It kind of soaks up the blood and helps it coagulate, and it astringes the tissue. It's actually quite good for that purpose. Cleanses ulcers. A decoction of the leaves and branches with wine applied with hot cloths soothes itchiness and around the genitals. It dissolves chilliness and coughs and is good used with rosaceum and wax ointment for all bad ulcers. It's combining it with rose oil and a wax salve, I guess I should say, SALVE, to put on ulcerous wounds. Taken as a drink with white wine, it cures a painful spleen and dysentery. Still to this day, sage taken in wine is one of the very best cures for diarrhea. Oak bark may be a little stronger, but sage is an absolute go-to. A good reason to have it around any way you look at it. And he's saying it reduced inflammations of the spleen. Similarly, given to drink, it cures blood spitters. That's people with tuberculosis and stuff who are coughing up blood. Again, that's the astringent property. And sage is also very good for the lungs. And he gives many different names for it. Oh, and he actually gives an herb a recipe for a saged wine that was to be used medicinally. But anyway, he says put 8 ounces of the herb into 9 gallons of must in a ceramic jar. First of all, it's going to be a dang big ceramic jar, and very few of us have 9 gallons of must. So I would just really cut that back and say, take an ounce of sage to about a gallon of wine. That's still a lot, so cut that down to 5/5 size bottles of wine in a gallon. If you take so just divide everything by 5. I guess first of all divide it by 9 because he's got 9 gallons to an ounce. Okay, then you know how much you need to a gallon. Then divide it by 5, and you know how much you put into a fifth. And you're going to sit this back and let it age for a while. And then he said it was good for disorders of the kidneys, bladders, and sides, as well as for blood spitters, coughs, hernias, convulsions, bruises, and impeded menstrual flow. That's one of the very interesting characteristics of sage. And the herbalist Michael Moore really looked into this. Sage is astringent. It stops bleeding. But it's also recommended to bring on menses. Well, why is that? It has a unique energetic effect in that way. It does stimulate the menstruation, especially when taken as a hot tea or in wine. But somehow it seems to stop all bleeding and diarrhea and other flows, as they would call it, taken cold. The same is true of yarrow. It works better cold for such conditions, whether in wine or as a tea or as a tincture. It's just one of those odd herbs that has sometimes surprising effects. And I think that's true of really all the sage family and the artemisias, which, like I said, are related, and the mints, which are related. They can really surprise us sometimes. They are our most commonly used herbs. but the effects of one compared to the other can be completely different. And they actually do have slightly different energetic effects taken hot or cold. Really, you know, really, you'll have to learn, and they're different for individuals. You'll have to learn as you work with the sages how you interact with sage. Pliny the Elder attributes 13 remedies for sage. He said the plant acts as an emmenagogue, meaning it brings on menses, and a diuretic, and it affords a remedy for wounds inflicted, it should say. It says indicted, but I think it should be inflicted by the stingray, having the property of benumbing the part affected. Fortunately, I have never been stung by a stingray in all my surf fishing. And if I did, I wouldn't be anywhere near a sage bush. But yeah, I think that would be horrible, actually. That's one of the things I'm always afraid of when I'm walking around the surface, and I'm going to run into a stingray. Every time a little crab will bite my toe, it's one of those reactions. Oh no, it's a stingray. You get used to it after a while. That was more like when I was a kid. Anyway, it is taken in a drink with wormwood for dysentery, employed with wine, and it celebrates the catamina. I don't know what the catamina is. A decoction of it having an effect on arresting them when in excess. So, yeah, employed with wine, it accelerates the catamina when retarded. So, in other words, it brings on menses. And a decoction of it having the effect of arresting them when in excess. So even, Pliny the Elder recognized that with wine, it would stimulate, and a decoction, a tea, would slow it. Even going back to Pliny the Elder, they recognized this different energetic effect of sage, which is very interesting. The plant applied by itself staunches the blood of wounds. It is a cure too for the stings of serpents, and a decoction of it in wine allays perigio of the testes. Apparently it was a skin disease, itchy skin with bumps. So, well, that's good to know. The ancient Romans considered to be sage a holy herb. It was used in religious ceremonies to drive away evil spirits. In Christian Rome, the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne ordered sage to be grown as a medicinal herb in all gardens in his edict, the Capitulaire, issued around 1802. Sage was an herb grown in the physic gardens of the Benedictines and included in the officina, as I've told you. Abbot Walfrid Strawbow was the tutor to Charlemagne's grandchildren, and he was the first herbalist to write a book on herbal medicine in the Christian era. And his book was written around 840. So sage was actually the very first herb he mentioned. So he's not going by alphabetical order. He was going by the importance in medicine. And this shows you sage was the most prominent of all herbs. He said of sage, there in the very front of his garden, that is, grows sage, sweetly scented. It deserves to grow green forever, enjoying perpetual youth. For it is rich in virtue and good to mix in a potion, of proven uses for many a human ailment, but within itself is the germ of civil war. For unless new growth is cut away, it turns savagely on its parent and chokes to death the older stems in bitter jealousy. St. Hildegard von Bingen, around 1100, recommended sage against noxious humors. For excess phlegm, she said it should be taken infused in wine. She also recommends it for those who are vergiftet, that means paralyzed or with a palsy or even bad arthritis or gout. It's an old German term that it's the equivalent of what we in the South say, all stoved up. He's all stoved up. Well, he should take some sage. She said, and for those who have a palsy, head and stomach plaints, urinary incontinence, intestinal pains, and the coughing of blood. It really vergiftet, or the gitched, as she often called it, could be any kind of pain, stiffness, weakness, palsy, paralysis, anything from arthritis to a stroke. She wrote that an ointment of rose and sage infused in melted lard is good for muscle cramps and paralysis. She said, also, one who is tortured by paralysis should take equal weights of parsley and fennel with a little less sage. He should grind these herbs together in moderate amounts in a mortar and add rose-tinged olive oil to it. he should place it over the place where he's suffering and tie it with a cloth. Now, I would like to see some people try this. I had a very dear friend who suffered a stroke and was paralyzed on one side of her body. Basically, the doctors did absolutely nothing for her. The physical therapist didn't help her. The nurses didn't help her. The doctors didn't help her. They put her in a nursing home where she died. She really lived out the last few years of her life. She hit about 90 before she passed away, and being essentially neglected and often mistreated in a nursing home. I would love it if some people would take maybe St. Hildegard's formula that I just mentioned and try that on paralyzed limbs and at least see if it helps. And there are other herbal remedies that have been used for centuries and are not used in modern medicine, obviously. And I think this is something we really ought to look into. But as I always say, there's no profit motive in using herbs. And our entire healthcare system is based on profit motive, especially the socialized aspects of it. What we call socialized medicine is fascistic medicine. It is where the large healthcare chains and the hospitals, the pharmaceutical companies, and all that, and the insurance companies put a lot of money into politicians' pockets to pass laws that say you have to use insurance and you have to use these services, and they put all the little guys out of business, and then they call it socialized medicine because they put a bunch of people on Medicare. No, it's actually fascist. It's actually the corporations, the businesses influencing government to mandate their use, which makes them phenomenally wealthy. But then again, fascism and socialism are always two sides of the same coin. You cannot compel someone to work if you take away their ability to make profit. You cannot compel someone to give up their money unless you mandate, Anyway, that's another story for another day. No one gives up their ambition and livelihood willingly, even for presumed comfort, unless, well, some people will, the lazy will, those who have an interest in life, those who have an intellect, will not unless forced. So socialism always ends up at the point of a gun, and it becomes fascism. Gerard wrote of sage in the 1500s. Sage is manifestly hot and dry, and it hath adjoined no little restriction or binding. What that means in the crazy old English, it hath adjoined no little restriction and binding, means it is astringent. Okay, that's like the English will say, I don't half fancy you, meaning I like you. Well, anyway, they're always talking backwards. The virtues, according to Gerard. Sage is singularly good for the head and brain. It quickeneth the senses and memory, strengtheneth the sinews, restoreth health to those who have palsy upon a moist cause, takes away shaking or trembling of the members, and being put up into the nostrils, it draweth thin phlegm out of the head. I'm not exactly sure how he was putting sage up people's noses. Maybe it's a nasal wash. We'll go with that. Maybe he made a decoction and did a nasal wash, or maybe he just means sniff it. But he meant it would get rid of sinus congestion. He said, it is likewise commended against the spitting of blood, the cough, the pain of the sides, and the biting of serpents. Now that's a wide variety of use. The juice of sage, when drunk with honey, is good for those that spit and vomit blood. It stoppeth the flux of, therefore, incontinent. He said it was good for incontinence. We'll go with that. And diarrhea. Expelleth wind. That means it gets rid of flatulence and indigestion, burping. Drieth the dropsy, which means it helps with edema. Helpeth the palsy, which means it helps with palsy or shaking and weakness. Strengtheneth the sinews and cleanseth the blood. The leaves sodden in water, that means soaked, with woodbine leaves, plantain, rosemary, honey, alum, and some white wine, make an excellent water to wash the secret parts of a man or woman. Remember before it said it was cleansing for a woman? Well, that's what he means. It's good for cleaning the genitals. And for cankers and other soreness of the mouth, No man need be in doubt of the wholesomeness of sage ale, being brewed as it should be with sage, scabious, betony, spikenard, squinancy. I'm not sure what squinancy is. I'll have to look that one up. And fennel seeds. All right. Ales used to be brewed with many different herbs. But before hops, and even for a while there, while people were using hops. And really, there's a lot of interesting recipes for beers brewed or ales, whatever, with these various herbs. You can find that in Stephen Herod Buhner's Sacred and Healing Herbal Beers. He gets into a lot of these old recipes, and the sage ale was considered to be very, very healthy. And sage would help preserve the beer, bitter it, and it was like a tonic. People drank sage ale every day. Let's see, he recommended sage with vinegar used as put in a cloth and put on the area that was affected. For those who had a stitch in their side, that pain you get when you're running your side, it can also be caused by an enlarged liver, or it can be caused by inflamed lungs. Either of those is just the same as when you're running. It essentially causes the organs to kind of rub together a little bit, and that's what we call a stitch in the side. And he said that was very good. It would take away the pain presently, and the same healtheth greatly the extremity of the pleurisy. So more than likely, because pleurisy is an inflammation of the lining around the lungs, this sage used as a compress, and he was saying as a hot compress. He talks about heating it over coals, essentially, or sprinkling hot coals into this. This is what they would have done in the 1500s. Used as a compress would help. And interestingly, Gerard listed one of the virtues of sage that helped prevent miscarriage, whereas Dioscorides said it could cause a miscarriage. So I'm just going to again recommend that herbs not be used during pregnancy unless an herbalist who is expert in herbs and women's health, like midwives used to be, some still are, most aren't. But there are women who specialize in women's herbs. If they recommend it, consider it. Do your own research. Talk to your doctor if you feel like you can trust your doctor. But I don't recommend herbs during pregnancy. I mean, sure, a little bit of blackberry or raspberry leaf tea in small amounts, but even too much of that can cause a miscarriage. So, I mean, seriously. By 1600, Culpeper wrote of sage. He had an interesting sense of humor, and in this one he claimed to be having conversations with Jupiter and giving Jupiter's advice to you. He says, Jupiter claims that, and Jupiter claims this, and bids me tell you it is good for the liver and to breed blood. Okay. Sage is certainly good for the liver, and he said to breed blood or increase the red blood cells. A decoction of the leaves and branches of sage made and drunk, saith Dioscorides, provokes urines and brings down women's courses, which we've already talked about that. He said it causes the hair to become black. Now, this is very interesting, because the herbalist that I apprenticed under years ago, Rosie Hicks, was part Cherokee and had long black hair. I mean, almost like knee-length black hair, right? She attributed that to every day she washed her hair with sage tea. Sage tea is an old remedy against gray hair. So, Culpeper had apparently knew this as common knowledge in the 1600s. It stays the bleeding of wounds and cleanses foul ulcers. 3 spoonfuls of the juice of sage taken fasting with a little honey doth presently stay the spitting and casting of blood of them that are in a consumption. These pills are much commended. Take of spikenard ginger of each 2 drams, and the seed of sage toasted on the fire 8 drams, of long pepper 12 drams. It's hard to find long pepper these days. You can usually just substitute black pepper, by the way. And these being brought into a powder, put thereto so much juice of sage, and make them into a mass of pills, taking a dram of them every morning fasting. Okay. He said that would help colds, rheumatic humors, that's feverish conditions, aches and arthritis. Also for the pains of the joints, whether inwardly or outwardly, and therefore help the falling sickness, the lethargy. Falling sickness was epilepsy, by the way. Lethargy, such who are dull and heavy of spirit, the palsy, and is of much use in all deflections or rheum from the head, against congestion from the head, um, and for the diseases of the chest or breast. The leaves of sage and nettles bruised together and laid upon impostumes that rise behind the ear, that's swellings, sores, swellings behind the ear, doth assuage it much, means it helps, calms it, takes down the inflammation. The juice of sage taken in warm water helps with hoarseness and a cough. The leaves sodden in wine, that means soaked in wine, and laid upon the place which is affected by the palsy helps much, if the decoction be drank. Also, sage taken with wormwood is good for the bloody flux, it's bloody diarrhea, etc. He said gargles with sage, rosemary, honeysuckle, and plantain boiled in water with some honey and alum are good for washing as a wash for sore mouths, throats, cankers, and the secret parts of man or woman as need requires. The juice of sage with vinegar hath been used in the time of the plague as a remedy, apparently. Sage is boiled in a bath. Sage is boiled to bathe the body and legs in the summertime, especially to warm cold joints or sinews troubled with palsy or cramp, and for comfort and to comfort and strengthen the parts. Let's see. We'll just kind of catch up to Miss Grieve in the 1930s. She gets, of course, into all the interesting history that she always gets into, and we're already running long, so I'm going to try to move around here. Let's see what else she says. An old French saying, sage helps the nerves, and by its powerful might, palsy is cured and forever put to flight. She gives medicinal action: stimulant, astringent, tonic, and carminative. Stimulant usually stimulates appetite when someone says it that way. Astringent shrinks tissue. Tonic it can help with general health, or it can stimulate appetite. And carminative, it settles an upset stomach, essentially. Has been used in dyspepsia, that's burping, heartburn. But is now mostly employed as a condiment in the United States, where it is still an official medicine. 1930, pharmacists were still prescribing sage, by the way. It is in some repute, especially in the form of infusion, the principal and most valued application of which is a wash for the cure or affections of the mouth, and as a gargle in inflamed sore throats, being excellent for relaxed throat and tonsils, and also for ulcerated throat. The gargle is used for bleeding gums and to prevent excessive flows of saliva. Interestingly, she said that sage tea was a valuable agent in the delirium of fevers and of nervous excitement accompanying brain and nervous diseases, and has considerable reputation as a remedy given in small and oft-repeated doses. Is a stimulant tonic in the debility of the stomach and nervous system, weakness of digestion in general. She said that it was useful for typhoid fever, bilious liver complaints, kidney troubles, hemorrhages of the lungs and stomach, for colds in the head, as well as sore throat, quinsy and measles, for pains of the joints, lethargy and palsy. It will check excessive perspiration. That's very interesting as well. Yes, sage is an herb that reduces excessive sweating. That's another one of those odd things about sage that has been noticed for years. And it can also help dry up breast milk. It has interesting properties. It will check excessive perspiration, etc. Useful as a menagogue. A cup of strong infusion will be found good to relieve a nervous headache. Yes, sage is a good headache herb. She also mentions that it was used to darken the hair. And just fresh leaves rubbed on the teeth were used to cleanse them and strengthen the gums. Sage, in her time and now, if you can find them, is a common ingredient in tooth powders. By the way, the Grow Network has an excellent tooth powder, one of their best products in their store, and I don't get any kickbacks on that, so I'm just telling you, it's really good. And she said the volatile oil of sage, just like absinthe and different herbs, very dangerous, very dangerous. Could cause seizures, organ damage, along with some intoxication. So people would use it for that purpose, and it got really hurt by it. So be careful with that. And she said in Sussex at the time, dried sage was smoked in pipes as a remedy for asthma, which makes a lot of sense. It's a good lung herb, and boiled in vinegar and used as a tonic. Looking at German folk medicine, Father Nape was very fond of sage. He said, those who have a garden near the house will not forget when replanting it the pretty ornamental sage plant. I have often seen passers-by take a leaf and rub their black teeth with it. This proves that sage has a cleansing power. Well, so that was known in different countries, you know. Old suppurating wounds, if washed with a decoction of sage, will quickly heal. Sage tea will remove phlegm from the palate, throat, or stomach. Sage boiled as a tea in wine and water purifies the liver and kidneys. His protege, Brother Aloysius, recommended sage for sweatings at night, asthma, chronic coughs, indigestion, diarrhea, lung catarrh or congestion, heavy bleeding, as a gargle for hoarseness, as a compress for old sores, bed sores for paralysis, epilepsy, rheumatism, dizziness, shivering and shaking in the limbs, congestion or catarrh, stroke, congestion of blood in the brain, nervous complaints, weak stomach, gas, colic, asthma, worms, indigestion, chronic coughing and gout, as a gargle for scurvy, thrush, and throat complaints, and to enlighten the brain. So there's, Brother Aloysius, 1920s, he's just blowing it out. I mean, this sage is literally good for just about everything. All right, here's what Maria Trevin said about sage in the German tradition. And if you think Brother Aloysius was fond of it, well, Maria Trevin says, we can read in a delightful old herbal during the Virgin Mary's flight from Herod, all flowers in the field were asked to hide her and the baby Jesus, but none gave her shelter except sage. After Herod's men had gone without seeing her and the danger had passed, the Virgin Mary told the sage, from now to eternity you will be the favorite flower of mankind. I give you the power to heal man of all illnesses and to save him from death as you have done me. Since then, sage has grown for the benefit of mankind. So that's an old Christian legend. You find this in many countries, Poland, all kinds of countries. And that's how valued sage has been traditionally. It was not just something to be thrown in sausage or stuffing. Sage was literally considered an herb blessed and beneficial for just about everything. She said sage tea drunk frequently strengthens the body and prevents stroke. It is good for paralysis. Sage, beside lavender, is the only plant that helps relieve night sweats. It attacks the illness which is the cause of it, and its invigorating forces take away the great weakness that is part of it. Many physicians have realized the beneficial qualities of sage, so they use it with great success for cramps, disorders of the spinal cord, glandular disorders, trembling of the limbs. It is blood cleansing, dispels the phlegm from the respiratory organs and the stomach, increases appetite, rectifies intestinal trouble and diarrhea, and is good for insect stings where crushed leaves are applied. Sage tea is used for ulcerated throat and mouth, inflammations of the tooth pulp, that's the dentin, tonsillitis, throat disorders. Many children and grown-ups could have saved themselves a tonsillectomy had they taken sage tea in time. It's a very old-time remedy. When the tonsils, which are the policemen for the body for toxic substances, are missing, the toxic substances go directly to the kidneys. A decoction of sage is a useful gargle for loose and bleeding teeth, ulcerated or receding gums. A small piece of cotton saturated with sage tea can be applied. A sitz bath taken once in a while would be of great help to women with abdominal troubles and to people with weak nerves. Besides its medicinal properties, sage is used as a culinary herb, and we'll get to that in a while. She really likes sage biscuits, and if you've ever had those like Cheddar Bay biscuits, they have at Red Lobster, which I don't eat at Red Lobster because like 3 times I ate there I got food poisoning every single time in 3 different cities. But those biscuits are really good, and her recipe to that seems pretty similar. So we'll talk about that another day. And she also really likes sage with venison or deer meat. The French herbalist Maurice Messague used sage very often, and his system was so different he never used herbs internally. They were always used in baths or foot and hand soaks. They were always applied externally. He was very successful with his remedies. But I He has very complex formulas, which you can find in my book, The Encyclopedia of Medicinal Bitter Herbs, or better yet, get his book, Maurice Message's of Plants and People. It's an absolute classic, and I didn't quote a lot from it because his book's great. You should have his book. You should have Maria Shreben's books on your shelf. I think they're yeah. I know I'm saying don't buy my books. Well, I'm saying they're buy my books too, but their books are really fantastic. He used sage for asthma, allergies, eczema, especially caused by liver weakness, for gout, for liver disease, for depression. Plants for a Future, which is current state, sage has a very long history of effective medicinal use and is an important domestic herbal remedy for disorders of the digestive system. Its antiseptic qualities make it an effective gargle for the mouth, where it can heal sore throats, ulcers, etc. The leaves applied to an aching tooth will often relieve the pain. The whole herb is antihydrotic, antiseptic, antispasmodic, astringent, carminative, cholagogue, galactifuge. It actually means it stimulates mother's milk. So I may have said that wrong when I said it was galactic. No, I'm sorry. Galactifuge does mean it dries it in. Yes, it doesn't stimulate. Okay, I was right. Galactifuge, stimulant, tonic, and vasodilator. Sage is also used internally in the treatment of excessive lactation. So, yeah, I was right. Night sweats, excessive salivation, as in Parkinson's disease, profuse perspiration, as in tuberculosis, anxiety, depression, female sterility, and menopausal problems. Many herbalists believe that the purple leaf form of the species are more potent medicinally. The remedy should not be prescribed to pregnant women or those who have epileptic fits. Remember, sage can actually, the essential oil can actually cause um, seizures. Um, the plant is toxic in excess or when taken for extended periods, though the toxic dose is very large. Yeah, you'd have to have a ton. Or use the essential oil, and even small amounts of essential oil can be very dangerous internally. Externally, it is used to treat insect bites, skin, throat, mouth, and gum infections, and vaginal discharge. The leaves are best harvested before the plant goes into flower and dried for later use. The essential oil from the plant, used in small doses to remove heavy collections of mucus from the respiratory organs, and mixed in embrocations for treating rheumatism, like the salve we talked about earlier. In large doses, however, it can cause epileptic fits, giddiness, that means dizziness, etc. Very dangerous to use the essential oil internally. So now let's get to a couple of Maud Greaves' great British recipes, which are really, really good. She quotes from Warner's Ancient Cookery, 1791. That's in very, very old English, and the kind that would be really hard for me to read. Kind of condense it and give you my translation. This is taking boiled pork, ground well, mixed with some eggs and grated bread. So you're making like a little patty, or a little croquette. Sprinkled with salt and saffron and leaves of sage, made into balls and fried, battered and fried. That would be very good. Sage and onion sauce, which is absolutely delicious. This comes from a cookbook from 1821. Chop very fine an ounce of onion and a half ounce of green sage leaves, and stamp them together with 4 spoonfuls of water. Simmer gently for 10 minutes. Put in a teaspoonful of pepper and salt and 1 ounce of fine breadcrumbs mixed together, and pour into it a 1/4 pint of broth, gravy, or melted butter. Stir well together and simmer for a few minutes. This is a relishing sauce for roast pork, geese or duck, or with green peas on migraine days. I'm not sure about what migraine days are. Maybe some of my British friends can tell me. But this is essentially, the English often use breadcrumbs to thicken a sauce. You could probably skip that and just make a roux. He said you could use broth or gravy. So this is, that's good. Onion and sage. It's going to be very good. The same book gives a relish for roast pork or goose. 2 ounces of leaves of green sage, an ounce of fresh lemon peel, pared thin, the same of salt, minced shallot, a half drachm of cayenne pepper, it's going to be a good pinch of cayenne, ditto of citric acid, steeped for a fortnight in a pint of claret, which is wine. Shake it well every day. Let it stand a day to settle and decant and clear the liquid. Bottle, cork it, and close it, and use a tablespoon or more in a 1/4 pint of gravy or melted butter. So that's a nice little sauce you could make to add to your dishes, and I gotta try that. That sounds fantastic. Sage and lemon. Oh man, and onion and cayenne pepper. That's good stuff. She says another sage sauce excellent with pork is 4 large sage leaves, 2 onions, 1 teaspoonful of flour, 1 teaspoonful of vinegar, butter, a walnut-sized pat of butter, essentially butter the size of a walnut. What an odd way to say it. Salt and pepper, a half pint of good brown gravy. Scald the sage leaves and chop them with the onion to a mincemeat. Put them in a stew pan with the butter, sprinkle in the flour, and steam for 10 minutes. That's kind of basically making a roux. Then add the vinegar, gravy, and seasoning and simmer half an hour. She's got one from 1857 for sage cheese, which is so good. Okay, English make really good cheese. And there are some old country recipes that are saged cheese. They're really good. Really good. Bruise the tops of young red sage with a mortar with some leaves of spinach and squeeze the juice. Mix it with rennet in the milk, more or less, according to the preferred color and taste. When the curd is come, break it gently and put it in with a skimmer till it is pressed 2 inches above the vat. Press it 8 or 10 hours, salt it, and turn it every day. That's actually making cheese, okay? If you don't know how to make cheese, you probably don't know what I'm talking about here. You take milk and you warm it to a certain temperature. You put in rennet. You let it sit. The curd and whey separates. The rennet makes the cheese form, essentially. You stir it to break up the curds. You then press all the whey out, all the liquid to form. At this point, it would be a cheese with the consistency of like fresh mozzarella, nice and soft and creamy. Salt it down, put it in a mold, wrap it in cheesecloth, however the style of cheese you're doing, and you can press it. You continue to press it, turn it. It keeps getting harder until you get a nice firm cheese like a cheddar or a manchego or Swiss cheese. Or you can keep salting and pressing it until it gets as hard as Parmesan. But this is a cheese made with sage and spinach actually in with the rennet. And I have had cheeses that were saged, meaning they were either rubbed with sage on the outside, aged in sage, or it was a softer cheese with sage mixed in. I've never had it made this way, and I'm going to have to try that because it sounds really good. It's just, sage just enhances the flavor of things like crazy. All right, y'all, nice long podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope some of these recipes you can use. I wanted to give you some of mine up front that may be a little more practical and easier to use than these old ones Miss Grieve gave you. But definitely take some of the ideas from her because it's going to be good stuff. And anyway, at the very least, add some sage to your gravy, and you're going to have some. You can make some very, very good roasts and beef with gravy or venison with gravy or some. Hey, go for some Yorkshire puddings if you want to. Anyway, y'all, have a great one. I will talk to you next week.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.